Goals and targets, they have a fundamental flaw to them. Here's the fundamental issue with goals and targets. When you set a goal or a target, the incentive that you create for your team is to prove to you, it's to prove that whatever incentive, whatever initiative it was, whatever it was that we were trying, that strategy, etc., is to prove that we've hit those numbers and therefore it's working. Whereas the reality is, what you need someone to do is not just pick out the good numbers and say, ta-da, but to actually look at the bad numbers and play detective, to say, what's actually going on? Why didn't that work? What are the bad numbers telling me?
You're listening to The Uncertainty Edge, the show about the art and science of moving forward when the path isn't clear. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan. Each episode, I sit down with leaders, advisors, and thinkers to explore how they navigate uncertainty, make better decisions, and stay focused in a world that rarely cooperates. Together, we'll look for the clarity hidden inside uncertainty. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Sivarajan, and welcome to today's episode of the Uncertainty Edge podcast. Today, I'm joined by Radhika Dutt, author of the book Radical Product Thinking, The New Mindset for Innovating Smarter. Radhika has spent her career helping organizations move beyond Silicon Valley mantras of iterate quickly and fail fast to develop systematic approaches for translating vision into reality. From her work with organizations like Singapore Central Bank and startups to her research on why traditional goal-setting frameworks often fail in today's knowledge economy, Radhika challenges some of the most entrenched beliefs in product development and organizational leadership. Her framework for vision clarity, strategic execution, and what she calls puzzle solving over goal setting offers a provocative alternative for leaders navigating complexity and uncertainty. Whether you're launching new initiatives or trying to keep teams aligned in fast-changing markets, Radhika's insights will challenge how you think about vision, strategy, and execution. Radhika, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sam. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Radhika, you've built your career, as I said in the intro, around challenging some of Silicon Valley's most popular phrases, such as iterate quickly, failing fast, just start driving and figure it out. What led you to question these approaches, and what patterns were you seeing that convinced you that there had to be a better way?
I realized that we needed to see the world differently from the Silicon Valley approach just because of my own personal experience. So let me share a little bit about, the product diseases that I've run into. So back in 2000, as I was graduating from university, I just finished electrical engineering at MIT. And right out of our dorm rooms, we were starting our startup. We had a grand vision, and our vision was revolutionizing wireless. And we had caught the disease I now call hero syndrome, where our focus was on being big, on scaling. The way we were measuring success was by the amount of fundraising that we had done, the big client logos that we had on our website. It all sounds very familiar, right? And this was 25 years ago. And yet we see the same sort of product diseases that are just as prevalent today in startups. So what I've realized was this whole Silicon Valley idea of you just start a startup, give it funding, just keep iterating, find product market fit. It doesn't really work that way. The reality is you have 2 to 3 pivots before you run out of either money or momentum. That is reality. Whereas just the pretty picture that we have, or the survivor bias that happens, is there are a few unicorns that make it by just iterating. And we've come to believe that, that's how you build products. It works for the VC business model. The VC business model is, I'm going to invest in 10 startups. I just need one of these to make it big. Everything else, I want it to either fail quickly or make it big, because I don't want to invest in a middling startup, right?
Right.
And so from a VC perspective, that's really where these mantras come from. This idea of go big or go home, fail fast, learn fast, this idea of just keep iterating, keep pivoting till you find product market fit. It all works for the VC because that's their business model. I invest in 10, just one needs to make it big. But from an entrepreneur's perspective, you have 2 to 3 pivots before you run out of money and momentum. So the way we need to think differently, what truly works is we have to treat every pivot like a silver bullet. We have to treat pivots with gravitas. We need clarity of vision and strategy, even as a startup. And you might have to change your way, but how do you pivot with gravitas? That is key to succeeding. This is why I realized from personal experience that we really need to think differently to succeed. Find what is right for the entrepreneur, not necessarily for the VC.
No, that's very profound, Radhika. And I think you're right. I think nothing has changed dramatically in 25 years. I think that VCs were throwing money at startups in the dot-com era. They're throwing money at startups, or at least were, in the age of AI that we have right now. I like your positioning. I think it is very profound when you say that model of fail fast or iterate works very, very well for VCs, but perhaps less so for entrepreneurs or startup founders. It seems to me that the mantra of VCs is almost if you build it, they will come for a select few of their businesses. So whether there is actually a demand for it or not, if you build it, if you throw enough money at it, if you market it, if you tell people that this is going to solve some problem that people didn't even know that they had or wanted to solve, that eventually it becomes a fait accompli. I mean, it sounds like, and I'd love your take on it, it sounds like a little bit of the template that was used with Theranos, with WeWork, perhaps with OpenAI, that we keep hearing about the gobs of money that is being sucked up into LLMs, et cetera, without there being corresponding evidence that they're either pivoting, as you point out, or that the market that they are targeting and that the problem that they're ostensibly solving is something that people actually are willing to pay to solve.
It's so true. And I think increasingly this is the game where you put a lot of money against or towards one startup, right? And it's become a game of who can collect the most money and a treasure chest, a war chest, so that you can wage wars, right? This
Mm-hmm.
is how Uber and Lyft
Mm-hmm.
sort of have gotten their share of the market because they just had a huge war chest and could just flaunt whatever law or go against whatever laws there
Right.
were and
Exactly.
say, well, we'll just fight those battles in court, right? Like what startup ever had that take back in the day?
Yeah, I think so. In this kind of a world that you so vividly paint, clearly the right VCs with the right kind of clout win. Who loses?
Oh, the it's a huge loss to society, right? If you think about Uber and what it's done to society, it's
Hmm.
not necessarily good. We
Hmm.
paint it as progress and technological progress. But if you talk to an Uber driver, it's not progress for them. I was talking to an Uber driver the other day. He was saying how when Uber started out, they used to take 20% of the cut and 80% would go to drivers. Now it's more like a 50-50 split.
Wow.
And on top of the 50-50 split, it's the Uber driver who is paying for, his car, gas, repairs, etc., right? It's not a fair system at all. And there's an algorithm that figures out what is the lowest I can pay Uber drivers. And it's not good for consumers either, because for consumers, what it does is, well, two things. One, there's, of course, surge pricing, and my ride to the airport used to be much cheaper many years ago than it is now. But there's a second element to it. In New York, it now takes 17% more time for anyone to get around the city, and it's because of Uber.
Because of the congestion.
Exactly. And also, it's made public transportation that much worse
Hmm.
because anyone who can afford it then takes an Uber, and the city has fewer people taking public transportation. So it's the people who are lower income that'll take public transportation, less of an incentive to invest in it. And it continues to spiral, right? So there are so this whole model of a few companies taking up all of the funding, having a war chest, then having the money to lobby, to fight the legal battles, etc., and building a user base or a marketplace sheerly by force and then imposing that on society.
Hmm.
And we think it's progress, but it turns out not to be over time. But we don't know that early on. This is sort of a recipe that we see over and over. And now we're seeing this with AI as well.
Hmm. No, I think that's very profound. I think, and beyond all of the factors that you talked about, greater congestion, higher pricing because there's no competition. You've got worsening climate because of all of the Uber drivers that are waiting to and idling in order to wait for their next fare. I think to your point, and this is a topic for an entirely different conversation, but we've gotten to the point where monopolies were bad, right? I mean, I remember the time. I'm a corporate lawyer by background. I remember a time when monopolies were bad, and we could trust all of the forces of government and regulators to do the best to kind of fight monopolies from existing. And it seems to me that the models that you're talking about is very much dependent on that old paradigm being washed away, and that we need monopolies. We need one or two category killers or dominators that are going to define what that industry is going to be. And yes, as you say, it is a fortune for the VCs that back it from the beginning. It is a fortune for the lucky startup, one or two startups that fit that mold. But it seems like everybody else pays for it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's a book titled One Day We Will Have All Been Against This. I love even the title of the book. But in that book, the author talks about how we think about this as progress, but it's more an acceptance of mediocrity. That is what it turns out to become over time. There are so many examples of this that I think are coming up for me, especially now in the AI era. We have thought about the AI era as something that is going to bring so much technological progress. And yes, there is potential for that. But increasingly, what I see more of are the dangers, not necessarily the promise of the potential. Yes, there is the potential that we'll build stuff so much faster. But
Hmm.
what I increasingly see will do is we'll create a bunch of AI product slop because it was easy to create,
Hmm.
and everyone else will have to just accept that mediocrity. So here's an example. It's not just that I'm making this up. Coca-Cola. Last year, they created their holiday ads using generative AI. And they got a ton of backlash for it because people would look forward to their holiday ads, of course. And, last year, those ads were just so crappy. Coca-Cola got a ton of backlash. So then you would think, okay, well, so what did they do this year in 2025? Well, they doubled down on AI. So this year, they just created more AI generated ads. And you know what? Their chief marketing officer, he didn't even defend it. He just said, guys, it took us 1 month to make this as opposed to having to plan a year ahead. We're going to do more of this. This is their plan.
Right.
And so, as consumers, basically the message is accept it. Mediocrity is what's coming. Just go with it.
That's scary. And to put it in a more vulgar term, I've heard it, I'm sure you have. I think there's actually been books. It's now become a word, is enshittification of the world, right? I mean, this idea of mediocrity that has become not just acceptable, but it's almost as aspirational, that you blanket the market with a mediocre product and you'll make lots of money, not because it's good, but because you've crowded out anything else that could even hope to compete, right?
Exactly. And so herein lies the challenge, right? Because a lot of people will say, well, the free market will address that, that people will vote with their dollar. But exactly to your point, when there's only one or two companies that flood the market, or if everything is mediocre because everything is AI generated in this way, there isn't really consumer choice for something better. So you can't really vote with your dollar, and so you do end up accepting this enshittification is how it goes. And so what I talk about, whether in radical product thinking or in a lot of my work, we can't expect that the consumer has a choice to vote with their dollar. So, where is the power?
Mm.
And the answer to that for me lies with employees. For every listener, realization we have to come to is that you're voting with your labor for the world that you want to create. You're
Okay.
voting with your labor and you have a choice. You can choose to just create things with AI and throw out slop without truly reflecting on what it is you're creating in the world, how it affects society. Or, and this is what I advocate for, you can think about your product as your mechanism for creating change in the world. And by creating this mechanism in a way that you very systematically engineer that change you want to bring about, this is how you vote for the world that you want to create.
So I think that's very powerful. Are you talking about rank and file employees? Are you talking about startup founders? I mean, because the argument I suppose one could use is that if I'm worried about getting paid and putting food on the table, how much power do I really have to kind of put that kind of thinking, that kind of ethos into my work?
Is such a great question, right? And this is where maybe I'll talk about the framework that I think about, where in the corporate world, you think about how do you balance long term vision against short term
Mhm.
survival. But in the same way, as an employee, it's the same sort of question that you have to ask yourself. What is your vision? What is the change that you want to see in the world, right? What happens often is we don't reflect on what is the world that I want to vote for. Without that reflection, whatever vote that you're casting, we aren't even giving it a second thought, right? I have a friend who used to work at Google.
Mhm.
And for the longest time, he would complain about, the change that Google was bringing to the world, how, Google used to have this approach of do no evil, how they
Right.
removed that.
Right. Very quickly.
Yeah. And he felt like I want to do something better, like I want to create change that I care about, etc. But he kept saying, well, but I really appreciate Google's paycheck and being well paid by Google. The thing is, though, I often said, if it bothers you, then why don't you look for another role? And he was always like, he never took that time to do that, right? So here's the difference. I agree with you. We sometimes have to balance this long term versus short term. You have to feed the family, pay the mortgage bills, etc. But if you have a vision for what is the change you want to bring, sometimes you have to weigh that and think about how you're balancing the two. If you draw that up on an X and a Y axis, your Y axis is this good for the vision or not? Is this good for the long term vision? And the X axis is this good for survival or not? Things are good for vision and survival. Those are the easy
I
decisions.
love that.
But we don't always hang out always in the easy decisions, right? Often we're doing what we call vision debt. This is good for survival. Maybe it brings in the paycheck or it's great for bringing in revenues, but it's not good for long term vision. So that's vision debt. For some people, right, like this friend of mine, he felt like he was taking on vision debt. And the opposite of that is when you're taking on investing in the vision. This is where it's good for the long term vision, but it's not good for short term survival. Example of this might be you've decided to take some time off to decide what is it that you really want to work on, or you've decided that, you really want a career change. This requires going back into taking a step backwards in your career to do this career change, right? And then there's the danger zone, of course, which is it's bad for vision, bad for survival. Nobody's really going after opportunities there.
Right.
So, my point is, you can use the same matrix even if you're balancing opportunities at work, right? You have a sales deal. You can think about is this vision debt? Are you investing in the vision? But you can look at this from a personal lens as well. What is your vision for change? Wherever you're working, if you're feeling like this is truly not satisfying, or if it goes against my values, maybe you're taking on vision debt. But if we never acknowledge that, you're never ever going to change where you're investing your time.
I love that. If I boil it down, you're saying, look, you can make a decision of whether you want to be in vision debt or invest in your vision, but fundamentally, you have to make it as an explicit choice and decision that you're making in the moment, right? That you have to think about, is this something that I'm doing for immediate survival and what am I giving up in the process? Or is this the time I'm going to invest in the future? And it's very similar to a part of my framework, which I talk about being span, that you have to make decisions that balance time horizons, both today and in the future. And I think it's a very hard thing to do, but I also think that we have to do it. The analogy I always use is that companies that talk about how innovation is critical and then yet cut their R&D budget, well, that doesn't compute, right? I mean, you can't sit there and say something is important, but you're not ready to invest in it. And I think that's what you're getting at, is whether it's on your personal level as an employee or whether you're a company, you have to balance short-term survival with who you want to be or what you want to be somewhere down in the future. And if your decision isn't explicitly making that trade-off, the reality is you're implicitly making that trade-off, and you may not like it a year, 2 years, 5 years into the future.
Yes, exactly. And I love what you said. That example that you gave of saying that you want to be innovative, but then you cut R&D budget. In a sense, if you look at that vision versus survival, what you've just said is, I'm going to stop investing in the vision. All of that R&D budget I
Right,
just slashed, I'm not
right.
investing in the vision. And on the other hand, when you take on all these custom features because, oh, we want to win this big deal, this customer will buy if we add this feature, all of that is adding vision debt, for
Mm,
example. And so at some point, you have to be able to look at the opportunities on this 2 by 2 that you're taking on. When you're always just taking on easy decisions and taking on vision debt, you're not being innovative, because innovation very often lies in investing in the vision. It's being able to think ahead,
mm.
that longer time horizon, and being able to say that I'm doing things that are good for that long term vision, but it's not going to sell tomorrow, right? And that's where you're investing in the vision.
That's a great example. The framework that you talk about, Radhika, this radical product thinking. Can you share an example of how you've used this framework to help an organization break through a strategic logjam, or perhaps avoid a costly mistake they were about to make?
I find this question so interesting, by the way. And one thing that it highlights for me is we often think about one costly mistake or one
Right.
big deal or a problem or saving someone from something big. What I think actually happens, the way we build a great product, is not by that one big decision that you made that was a good decision or averted a bad decision. It's a series of small things that you do that take you in the right direction, right? So when I think about building a product, right, and when we make decisions about features or whatever we're building, when we
Mhm.
say, what am I going to build this next month? What are the features I'm going to take on? It's not necessarily about that one feature that I said no to or that one feature I said yes to that made all the difference. It's really a series of small decisions. Because what happens, right, is very often you take on small decisions in that vision debt quadrant,
Mhm.
or you don't invest adequately in the vision. And over time, it starts to
It
piss
accumulates.
off customers. And I'll give you an example of this. There was a company where, there was the whole engineering team had thought ahead and they knew where the standards body was going 5 years ahead. They even participated in the standards body and they got the standards body to approve a particular standard that they knew that they could be first to market with, and that this way they would lock in their market position. So the engineers were thinking so far ahead. Brilliant. Then they came back to home base headquarters and they said to the product manager, we need to build this feature. And the product manager goes, but nobody's asking for this feature. We're not going to build it right now. We'll wait. We have time. So they kept pushing it out, kept pushing it out. They never invested in that vision in terms of building out the standard. And in the meanwhile, everyone else went and built the standard. And this big company that was the behemoth that had set the standard in the standards body
We're behind.
were behind. And then finally they implemented it and they sort of, caught up. But it was sort of a Me Too solution, half assed. But this is what happens. We often don't invest in the vision and then we end up taking on vision debt. This is how this was implemented. So, my point is that it's never just one big decision. It's constantly observing where you are in terms of, are we taking on too much vision debt?
Mm.
Are we not investing in the vision enough? Like, how are we balancing these quadrants? It's that constant reflection. That is the power of this approach, being able to reflect as a team. So, the biggest thing I'll say is when I work with organizations, the biggest benefit of this view is instead of leaders just imposing a view, or instead of me imposing a view and saying, this is our priority, we need to do 1, 2, and 3, I draw this up for the team where I talk about, here's the vision, here's what survival means. How are we balancing these quadrants? So whether I'm talking about sales opportunities, initiatives for the next quarter, or even a sprint plan for this next sprint coming up,
Hmm.
we look at how we're balancing these quadrants, right? And this means I'm spreading my influence, my way of thinking, and how I'm balancing long term against short term across the whole team, the company, so that people are thinking like me, even when I'm not in that room. So that even when they're making decisions about how do I code this up or how do I sell this product, they can think about the same vision versus survival balance and make the right choices when I'm not in the room.
So I love your characterization of this as balance. I would call it trade-offs because that's just the language that I'm used to. But I think it's important. And I've always said, whether it's in a financial context or in a business context or in a personal context, every decision that we make has a trade-off, whether you choose to spend versus save, whether you choose to eat that piece of cheesecake instead of salad, etc. It's a trade-off. And I think that we've gotten to some extent to this view, or we're being marketed a view that we don't have to make trade-offs, that we can have our cake and eat it too. And that's led to a sort of a lazy behavior that says, well, we don't have to make this choice. This product manager that you're talking about, for example, right? And I think what you're arguing with this vision debt versus vision investing in the vision is making it crystal clear to people that this balance is about where does that trade-off lie for you as an individual or for you as an organization. And there's no right answer. It's not your job or my job or anyone else's job to tell a company or an individual how they should make that trade-off decision, only that they recognize that they will have to make a trade-off and they just should do it methodically and having it well thought out, as opposed to having it made for them implicitly.
And I love your point, and that's exactly right. Very often, when I share this 2 by 2 in these 4 quadrants, people ask me, what is the right balance between across these quadrants? And exactly to your point, right? There's no one who can tell you what is the right balance for you. If you're a bootstrap startup, you might find that you end up taking on more vision debt. You might find that you take on one custom feature after
Right,
another
right.
because you gotta win that deal and that's how you're going to survive, right? You might be a much bigger company and maybe you have a whole war chest and then you can do more of investing in the vision. Whatever that balance is, you have to talk about this within your team, and the alignment between leadership and all the employees in understanding what is the right trade-off for you. I think that's really where the power of this lies. And to your point also, with the um, with AI just making it so easy to build stuff, whether it's creating content or creating apps through vibe coding, etc.,
Mm,
we start to think that, oh, there are no trade offs anymore, that I can just
right,
build
right.
all of these things with AI. But the reality is, yeah, sure, I could vibe code all of these things, but someone still has to put it together. There's someone who still has to make sure that all of this code, someone is going to have to end up refactoring it. It all has to fit together. You can't just all throw these disparate apps together. It has to fit in. There has to be a cohesive back end, etc. There is still work to be done. There are always inherently trade-offs, and we can't forget that.
I think I want to switch gears a little bit. When we talked earlier, you talked about your upcoming work and it challenges this entire premise. We talked about alignment within an organization, but your work is challenging this premise of goal setting and OKRs. For listeners who are not aware, it's the objectives and key results frameworks that have been like gospel in corporate America for decades. It is the playbook that all leaders and all big consulting companies want to ensure that companies are following. You argue quite convincingly that these approaches were designed for repetitive assembly line work from the 90s and doesn't translate well to today's knowledge economy. Now, that's a very powerful and provocative argument. So, I'd like you to expand on that for our audience. So, what should leaders be doing instead? And how does your puzzle setting, puzzle solving type of approach differ fundamentally from goal setting?
Yeah. So Let's take a step back even in terms of why I say goals and targets don't work. And we can call it OKRs, SMART goals, whatever the framework for goal
Right.
setting. It always seems like goal setting frameworks that this is the new and best way of doing it. OKRs being the latest version. It was evangelized in 2018 by John Doerr, the famous VC billionaire. And it makes it seem like this is a new idea. Google says that's its secret to success, etc. So clearly it must be working well. The reality is, goals and targets, they have a fundamental flaw to them. And here's the fundamental issue with goals and targets. When you set a goal or a target, the incentive that you create for your team is to prove to you, ta-da, I've hit that target.
Mm-hmm.
It's to prove that whatever incentive, whatever initiative it was, whatever it was that we were trying, that strategy, etc., is to prove that we've hit those numbers and therefore it's working. Whereas the reality is, what you need someone to do is not just pick out the good numbers and say, ta da, but to actually look at the bad numbers and play detective, to
Mm-hmm.
say, what's actually going on? Why didn't that work? What are the bad numbers telling me? Whereas when you set a target, right, everyone wants to show, look, I'm a high performer, I achieve targets. So when there isn't an incentive to really reflect on the bad numbers, this is why Andy Grove, the legendary Intel CEO, he said, leaders are always the last to know. You don't get real information from the trenches in terms of what's actually happening. What you get is information in terms of what you expect to hear and the incentives that you're giving people in terms of what you want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do I do instead? So although in organizations very often we work based on goals, targets, etc., I work with teams from this lens of puzzles, to set and solve puzzles. So I'll give you the example of a company I've been working with. It's called Signal Ocean, and it's in the maritime industry. And basically what Signal Ocean does is they're a data platform. If you, in the simplest terms, look at it, it's basically helping people in the maritime industry figure out what is the best vessel, shipping vessel, to match to which cargo so that I can optimize profits. Now, Signal's data platform, it's brilliantly accurate. But when I joined the company in 2023 as a consultant, sales had stalled. And looking at the technology, you go like, I don't understand. Why isn't everyone using this in the
Mm-hmm.
market, because the technology is revolutionary. So why has adoption stalled? And so when I joined, we looked at the data, and what we saw was a puzzle was forming for me, which was only tech savvy brokers in the maritime industry were using the platform. So you go, interesting. Why are only tech savvy brokers using it? Why aren't the others using it? And then we started framing the puzzle by asking questions, because a puzzle mindset means there are questions that we don't know answers to, because
Mm-hmm.
if you knew everything, it's not a puzzle, right?
Right.
So we felt free to ask a few questions. So here are a few questions. What do people who are not brokers, how do they work? How do they think? And how is it different from how brokers think? Then there's this next question. It's the tech savvy users who are using it. What about the tech averse users? How do those people think? And how are they different from these other users? So these are questions we genuinely didn't know answers to. Like, how do these people operate? And so we started doing some observations so that we started to frame this puzzle for ourselves. And the way you can visualize all of this approach until now is, imagine you have a Rubik's Cube. You
Mm-hmm.
can't start trying to solve a Rubik's Cube until you have a really good sense of how these pieces are moving. And so this was our framing the puzzle and observing users. Now we understood how the pieces were moving. Then you start to solve the puzzle. And when you solve the puzzle, now you're ready to take your first attempt because you've understood the puzzle. And as you take your first attempt, you ask 3 questions. So the first question is, how well did it work? And notice how different it is from goals and targets.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not asking for just the good numbers. I'm not asking you, did you or didn't you hit this target? I'm inviting the good and the bad. Tell me, how well did it work? Right? Then the second question is, what did you learn?
Mm-hmm.
This is where I say to teams, don't just spit out lots of numbers at me. Don't just tell me, weekly active users and time spent on site, blah, blah. Tell me what's going on. What have you actually figured out? And then the third question is, what will you try next? So if I gave you a magic wand, based on how well it worked and what you learned, what will you try next? So here's what we tried at Signal. So we saw tech savvy brokers were using it. And we observed all these different users, those who had cargoes, those who owned vessels. How do they behave? What do they do? And then we came up with a hypothesis. We had all these workflows we figured out. So we figured out what workflows we needed to add. And the second thing was we said, aha, not only are we going to add these workflows, we're going to automate it so that those who are tech averse, if we
Mm-hmm.
do some automation, that things will be much easier. So now we can ask those three questions, right? How well did it work? So here's the first answer. Well, it turned out people liked the workflows that we'd figured out. They hated the automation, absolutely hated the automation. Question number 2. What did we learn? So we learned that yes, we should implement the workflows, but why did the automation fail so badly? Why did they hate the automation? And what we learned was that these tech averse people, they don't trust technology, that our technology felt like magic to them. So when we automated, they were like, this is just
I don't
this.
understand it.
Yeah, exactly. How did you get these numbers? This is
Mm-hmm.
like magic. I don't trust this, right? So that's what we learned, that magic doesn't work. So the third question, what will we try next? This is where we said, okay, so we'll add the workflows, but instead of automation, we will guide them step by step at every point. We'll make them feel like they are in control, no magic. And so this is what we did, right? And so we continued to puzzle set and puzzle solve like this. And we doubled revenues in 2024, doubled it again in 2025. And this is the power of puzzle setting over goal setting.
I love it. I think that's powerful, and I love the metaphor of puzzles. And if I can encapsulate what you the approach, I think you're if I'll go with the puzzle analogy, you're talking about first looking at the box, right, at the picture on the box, etc., to get an outside perspective of how others are seeing it and where you're trying to get to. And so that's asking the questions, what are we trying to do and why and how and all of those things. I think in putting a puzzle together, you try to get the pieces that you know. So, the way I do it, I put the corner pieces, the edge pieces, because you sort of know that they frame the picture. And I think you're iterating, right? You keep experimenting, you try. You say, does this piece look like it goes here? There's reasons to believe that this could work. We're going to try it. And when it doesn't, you don't give up, and which is, I think, the problem that you talk about, I think, is the inherent problem in goal setting. It's a binary outcome. Either you've succeeded or you failed. Whereas this puzzle setting, puzzle solving approach is that it's inherent in there that there is going to be iterations, that you're going to fail, but you're going to learn from it. And as a result, that you're going to finally come still closer and closer to the outcome that you're looking for, which is to match the picture that you have on the outside of the box, or in this case, to solve the problem of what is it Signal is trying to achieve with its target consumer base, right?
Yeah, so much to unpack in what you said, right? So in the mantra of just keep iterating, iterate quickly, etc., right? And even if you look at lean startup and what it says, in lean startup, it does say you have to identify the problem. But if you look at how it is summarized, the summary of lean startup is build, test, learn, scale. Think about where the emphasis is. The emphasis is on build. Just start by building,
Right,
trying
right.
something, putting it in the market, right? So, in fact, the puzzle setting and puzzle solving approach, the starting point is different. So, the framework that I call this puzzle setting, puzzle solving framework, I call it OLA, which stands for observe, hypothesize, learn, adapt. But observe is the first step, right? What happens is we don't stay in the problem space long enough. What happens today is we want to jump to solutions. So, in fact, when I started working with Signal, at first, the whole team, when they were looking at data, the data was telling us that the biggest pain point for users was filtering. So basically, there's a filtering functionality for
Mhm.
lists in this tool. The biggest problem was filtering. This is what data was telling us. If you're focusing on goals and targets and improving user engagement, etc., you look at data and you jump to the first solution. And this whole iteration mindset tells you, it says filtering is the problem. Let's jump to fixing filtering.
Right.
I'm going to
Right.
improve filtering and launch the solution. And hopefully that's moved the needle in terms of goals and the targets for user engagement, right? But instead, what we said was, what is the puzzle? We took some time to define the puzzle, to observe, to ask questions. We didn't jump at it from this angle of, I know the solution.
Right.
We first said, what is the problem? And then observing, then we decided to take our first hypothesis. That is a key difference. And in fact, what happens in organizations, and I was talking to someone who was heading up user experience at Morgan Stanley, and they were saying how even being a user experience researcher, etc., UX researcher, they know all of these principles. They know that they have to stay in the problem space, except do they ever get to do that? No, because you might do user research and say, we need to do this, but everyone pushes you towards, okay, yes, but we have these goals to hit. What's the
These
quick
quarterly
win that we
goals.
can do?
Exactly. Interesting. So, on that note, in our earlier conversation, you said that one of the key traits that you look for now, whether in founders or team members or people that you're working with, is coachability. And that's an interesting concept because venture capital has historically rewarded confidence and perhaps even arrogance. So, how do you assess whether someone is truly coachable versus just agreeable? And why does this matter so much in navigating the uncertainty of solving for what the market needs?
Yeah. And I think this is such an interesting question because I've also had this debate with investors. Sometimes I've talked to them about why do investors pick someone with so much arrogance, right? Because on the one hand, you need arrogance and hubris to say, I'm going to doggedly pursue this
Right,
idea.
right.
But at the same time, you have to be not so in love with your own idea that you're unwilling to learn and adapt. So, in the whole OLA format, right, of observe, hypothesize, learn, adapt, what makes me realize if someone is coachable or not is how flexible they are in terms of wanting to learn and adapt, the level of curiosity that they have. You truly have to have openness and curiosity to be able to look at a puzzle, not just try to. So if you look at the example of the puzzle that I was setting, right, when we talked about tech savvy brokers using it, you had to have genuine curiosity to say, how are the other people behaving today? What do they do? Not just approach it from how do they use Signal. So you have to approach it with genuine curiosity. You have to be able to say, why should those users behave exactly the way they are behaving today? Like, why is it in their right? Why are they exactly right to behave the way they are? Maybe I can change the world for them, but you have to approach it with that level of curiosity so that you can then understand them, empathize, and then solve the problem. I think this is the key piece of coachability that I look for, that openness and curiosity, and then the willingness to learn and adapt from it. It's not enough just to to have this openness, but a big piece of it for me is to see, what do they do then afterwards, right? Like sometimes one of my biggest tests is I give them feedback on their pitch deck. And then what do they do with it? Do they then adapt it, or do they sort of just discard the feedback and it's
Right.
back to business as usual?
And what have you found? Can you, in those kind of instances? I guess there's a bit of both, right? You've got people that do take that feedback and others that don't, etc. So, what do you do in those instances where they ask you for feedback, you give them the time and the effort, and you give them this coaching, if you will, they ignore it, and then they come back next time? What do you say to them at that stage?
It is funny. This has happened to me where startup I was advising, I was sharing some feedback in terms of what I was seeing in terms of issues with co-founders. And I was saying, beware of this issue coming up in 6 months. And 6 months later, he was like, yeah, you were right. How did you know? It's like, yeah, I've been through founder divorce. It's painful. So, and then I was giving him some other advice. And then 6 months later, he was like, how did you know? But I think this is where, for me, I've learned two things. One is that I don't just do free advice anymore. Like, I am very happy to share information or advice on a passion project, but it's become very rare now that it's really about being an advisor. And, if someone really wants my advice, if they value it enough, then there's compensation either in terms of equity or pay. Because otherwise, I find exactly what you're describing, that it takes up time, but then when there isn't anything, when there is no investment on the part of
There's
the
no skin in the
founder,
game,
like it
right?
just doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. So, Radhika, looking at high profile failures, we started this conversation with that, with the failures like WeWork, Theranos, or even the current AI hype cycle. What do you think enables these companies to raise billions of dollars, attract top talent, despite arguably fundamental flaws in their vision or their strategy? And what do you think investors and advisors can learn from these patterns?
So I think one of the things that I see as a pattern, right, is that it feels like there's strength in numbers. So whenever a startup has momentum, everyone wants to invest in it, and it feels like there's safety in numbers. And so there are
Herd
lots of
mentality, basically.
Exactly. And I think this happened both with WeWork, but also with Theranos, but there are so many other examples. So one thing that I find very helpful is clarity of vision, right? That instead of finding safety in numbers, asking or expecting clarity in the vision. So as an investor, I think what we really need to look for is, are you seeing that sort of clarity in terms of vision in that startup? And so this is the big mistake that I had made when I'd started out, right? I was telling you about my first startup. Our vision was revolutionizing wireless. In hindsight, what we needed was a radical vision statement. When you have a vision like revolutionizing wireless, or Snapchat, for example, has this vision of contributing to human progress by empowering people to express themselves, right? What does that even mean? When you have such broad vision statements,
Right,
basically anything goes, just build
right,
anything.
right.
And so, if you go back to also what I was saying about the vision versus survival, the X and Y axis, when you have such a broad vision like democratizing justice or revolutionizing wireless, that two by two matrix becomes meaningless because everything feels like a vision fit.
Oh, I love
And
that.
so, what you need as an investor, but even as a founder, so this is where you can be aligned, is have a detailed radical vision statement. So here's an example of a vision statement written in the radical product thinking format. It's a fill in the blank statement so that you can focus on what is the problem statement and then talk about how you'll change the world with your product. So here's an example, right? This was a startup that I founded in 2011, sold in 2014. Today, when amateur wine drinkers want to find wines that they are likely to like and learn about wine, they have to find attractive looking wine labels or find wines that are on sale. This is unacceptable because it leads to so many disappointments, and it's really hard to learn about wine in this way by picking nice looking bottles. We envision a world where finding wines you like is as easy as finding movies you like on Netflix. We are bringing about this world through a recommendations algorithm that matches wines to your taste and an operational setup that delivers these wines to your door. So, this is a radical vision, right? Every time I share this fill in the blank statement, maybe some words might change here and there, but the point is not about memorizing the words. It's about having a detailed vision that tells you exactly what is the problem, who has this problem, how are they solving it today, and then what is the end state you want to bring about and how you'll bring it about. It's only after you finally define the problem and why the world is absolutely unacceptable without this being solved that you finally earned the right to talk about the change you can bring with your
Right.
product.
No, and I love it. And I think to your point, it becomes then your North Star that allows you to make each of those decisions, those hard decisions along the way, along that X and Y axis, those quadrants, whether it's a vision debt or investing in your vision, because you have clearly articulated what the problem is, why you are the one to solve it. And, you can evaluate decisions accordingly. Radhika, we're coming to the end of our podcast. So I have a few final rapid fire questions for you. So, number one, professionally, what is the most important lesson you've learned over the years?
Most important lesson. I will say that my background is as an engineer. And so for a long time in my career, I was very task oriented and getting things done. And it was really all about, I know what it is I need to get done. And this whole idea of consensus, buy-in, alignment, it all felt like fluff that, I just have to waste time on. Just get with it, people. But there's a whole different side that I've learned over time, and the power of bringing everyone with me on the journey, and how, as a leader, we can delegate more because people really get our way of thinking. That we've been able to not just transmit information in terms of these are my priorities and this is the vision, but more details, like getting people
Mhm.
to understand what are the right trade-offs to make, what is the end state of this vision so that they can also pursue it, how to make your vision a shared vision, not just your own that others are chasing because you're telling them to, right? All of this and the soft skills, this has been a huge part of my learning experience.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think what you're describing is the learning curve that every subject matter expert or individual contributor goes through to as they grow in their careers and in their lives to lead a business or run a team, etc. You have to kind of bring your technical expertise to map it along with human behavior to say, how do you make this, as you so well put it, a shared vision, a shared mission that the others around you want to embrace, not because you tell them to or that you're paying them to, but because they truly believe it, right? And it is, I think it's a lesson that it applies to everyone. And I think arguably perhaps even more so in today's world when people are looking and companies are arguing about purpose and not just profit, right? So how do you bring people along on that vision? Radhika, what is number two? What is one practical tip you would offer listeners keen on applying your insights?
One thing I'd say is whether you're using radical product thinking or this OLA framework that I talk about for puzzle setting and puzzle solving, a great way to start is just to start, in the privacy of while you're sitting at your desk and just try out this vision statement. Think about a puzzle also that you're working on. Think about a past initiative and then think about how you would set the puzzle and solve that puzzle. Doing all of this just by yourself, having this time to reflect, is such a powerful way of learning. There was a quote I came across recently, which was, you learn not through experience, but you learn by reflecting on experience. And so being able to write such a vision statement, work on this puzzle setting, puzzle solving, etc. Right? All of this is a way of also reflecting. It helps us learn from experience, and then it helps us become much better leaders so that we can communicate much better with our teams.
I love it. Radhika, an amazing discussion. If listeners want to learn more about you or find out about your work, where do they go?
First of all, they're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I always love to hear how people are creating change. They can also get the Radical Product Thinking book, which is on Amazon and in bookstores. And lastly, I'm working on my second book, and it's about why goals and targets don't work and how to use this puzzle setting and puzzle solving. So people can download the free OLA toolkit, and I'll share with you a link on for our show notes. So people can use the OLA toolkit to be able to use the puzzle setting, puzzle solving framework. And as you use it, you're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn and share with me your experiences, which might just make it into the book as a case study while I'm working on the second book.
Awesome. And as you say, this will all be in the show notes. Radhika, thank you for joining us today on the Uncertainty Edge podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on. This was such a fun discussion.
Likewise. In this episode of the Uncertainty Edge podcast, I spoke with Radhika Dutt, author of Radical Product Thinking, about why the Silicon Valley mantras we've come to rely on may actually be working against us and what to do instead. Here are my three key takeaways. Number one, iterate quickly is great advice for VCs, but not for you. The fail fast keep pivoting playbook was never designed for founders or leaders. It was designed to serve a venture capital model that bets on 10 startups, hoping one becomes a unicorn. For everyone else, you have 2 or 3 pivots before you run out of money or momentum. The leaders who succeed treat every pivot with gravitas, with clarity of vision and strategic intent, not just restless experimentation. Number 2, vision debt is real, and you're probably carrying some. Every decision you make is either investing in your long term vision or taking on vision debt, doing what keeps the lights on at the expense of where you're actually trying to go. Radhika's 2x2 framework makes this trade off explicit and visible for the whole team. The power isn't in any single decision, it's in the habit of asking, again and again, are we building toward what matters or just surviving? Number 3, puzzle solving beats goal setting. Traditional goal setting frameworks, OKRs, SMART goals, targets, create an incentive to show the good numbers and hide the bad ones. Radhika's alternative, the OLA framework, observe, hypothesize, learn, adapt, starts in the problem space before jumping to solutions by asking, how well did it work? What did we learn? And what will we try next? Leaders invite honest reflection rather than performance. That shift from proving to learning is what doubled revenues for one of our clients 2 years running. Radhika reminds us that the most dangerous assumption in leadership is that more speed and more building will solve a problem you haven't fully understood yet. Advisors and leaders who slow down to set the puzzle right will consistently outperform those who sprint towards the wrong answer. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Uncertainty Edge. If today's conversation sparked something, subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You'll get practical tools, deeper insights, and new episodes every other Tuesday. Please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also subscribe to the newsletter at theuncertaintyedge.com